Hi, everyone. My name is Preston Nicholson. I'm the Assistant Dean for Admissions at Washburn Law School, and thank you so much for signing in today to watch our presentation on Personal Diversity and Addendum Statements 101. Hopefully throughout this presentation, you'll learn something new about these statements, their importance, how to craft them, how to impress an admissions committee. I'm not here to talk specifically about Washburn Law School. The advice I give today will be true for any law schools that you're applying to. But my first word of caution is to contact any schools that you're considering applying to, because they may have specific advice for you. They may have specific things they want you to discuss in these statements. So if you're unclear, unsure of what to address in these statements, taking the advice that I give today and then maybe contacting your schools is probably your safest bet. If you're on an undergraduate campus and you have a pre-law advisor, they can also be fantastic resources for you to help you through these statements. They can be a useful eye for proofreading, for advice. If you're an alum of an undergraduate school, the pre-law advisors at your undergraduate school are still there to help you, so that could be a good resource for you as well. But hopefully today I can give you some advice that will be helpful for you as you're crafting these statements, as you're debating what to write about. We understand as admissions officers that this can be the hardest part of the application because there's doubt, there's uncertainty about what you should write about what topic is best, about how to reach that admissions committee and how to impress them. So hopefully the advice I give today will be helpful in sort of calming some fears, but also giving you confidence as you write these statements to make sure that you're putting your best foot forward. So the three topics I want to talk about today are personal statements, diversity statements, and addendum statements. Now, I may talk about things that you already know through your own research or through conversations you've had with other individuals, but stick with us because there's going to be nuggets of information I give you that I know you haven't heard before, or hopefully you haven't heard before. Plus, it's always nice to get different perspectives, especially from someone who's read thousands of these statements. Good perspectives on how to address them. The first statement, I want to dive right in here, and I want to ask you to ask any questions that you may have throughout the presentation. Type them into the chat. We can see them, we'll address them, and we'll get your questions answered, and hopefully you can walk away here with good knowledge and more information. The first statement I want to talk about today is the big one, the one that's required by all law schools, and that's the personal statement. The personal statement, first and foremost, is a showcase of your writing ability. When law school admissions committees are looking at these statements, they are not only wanting to learn more about you, but they're also looking at how you write, because writing is one of the most fundamental skills for law school. And one of the ways that we can really gauge writing ability is through this personal statement. So it could be a very important aspect of your application, because if you're a strong writer, this is your chance to really show that off and really impress an admissions committee with your writing ability. So in that regard, it can be a very, very important part of the application. But it's also important for another reason as well. It's the way that admissions committees and admissions deans get to know you through this process. There are some schools out there that do interviews, of course, but the majority of US law schools do not have a formal interview process. So the way that we really get to know you through this process is through the personal statement. It's my favorite thing to say about the personal statement is that it's called a personal statement for a reason. It's personal. It allows us to connect with you in a way that we wouldn't be able to connect with you without having the statement in your application. So I want to touch on some things with the personal statement that can really make it pop, some formatting issues with the statement, and also just some tips and tricks and maybe some do's and don'ts as well as you're thinking about this statement. First of all, it's you, it's personal. So as you're writing the statement, make it about you. We really want to get to know you better. We really want to learn who you are and why you're awesome. Sometimes I'll read statements that are about other individuals, maybe mentors, maybe people who have influenced you. And that can tell a good story. That can be a good reflection, but the writer will spend the majority of the statement talking about that other person and not really focus so much on the applicant themselves. And that can be a big mistake because this is valuable real estate, and the more opportunity that we have to get to know you through the personal statement, the better. So I guess the first corny piece of advice I would give you is make the statement about yourself if you can. If you do want to reflect on someone else, if you do want to reference someone else, someone that's been an important part of your life, a family member, please do that. But tell stories about how that person impacted you, what you learned from that person, how you're a better person now because of that person. Instead of making it about them, turn it around and make it about you. Regarding length, a lot of people have length questions, wanting to know how long the personal statement should be or how short the personal statement should be. Schools may give you specific guidelines when they are putting the personal statement information on the application. They may have specific guidelines for you, and check those if there are specific guidelines. The idea, though, the good length that most law school admissions deans would recommend to you is about 2 pages double-spaced, 3 if you absolutely need it. The kind of main idea of being an attorney is to be clear but concise, to get the point across but in the most concise way. So the personal statement is a reflection of that. We have a question in the chat about how do you talk about yourself without seeming overly pretentious. It's rare that I'll read a statement where I'll think of the person as pretentious after having read it about them. One thing to keep in mind with this statement is it shouldn't really be just a 2-page rehashing of the resume or a bragging statement talking about all of your accomplishments. It's a statement that allows us to get to know you better. So letting us in on a story, why you're thinking law school, what event in your life maybe had an impact on you, changed you, shaped you, allowed you to grow, allowed you to learn something about yourself. Those are the personal types of statements that are the most effective. So I would say the only way that you could really worry about being pretentious is maybe if you are rehashing your resume or you're using the 2-page statement to brag about all of your accomplishments. What we're looking for, because we'll have your resume as part of our application, what we're looking for is learning something that we can't learn through other parts of the application. A personal story, a reflection, something like that. So I don't think it's easy to come off as pretentious in the statement because we want to get to know you, and this is the way for us to gauge who you are. Let me tackle some other questions here. If our personal statement talks about diversity, is it necessary to write a diversity statement? And would it hurt our application to not have a diversity statement? I'll talk a little bit more about diversity statements in just a little bit, but I think that diversity statements are always a good idea if you feel that it's justified for you to submit one. This is your chance and your opportunity to put your best face forward in front of the admissions committee. A diversity statement can be yet another example of your writing ability. So even if you talk about diversity in your personal statement, I think a diversity statement can be a good idea because then you can expand more on that idea of diversity, what diversity means to you, what diversity you bring to the law school class. So I don't think any law school committee would fault you for having a personal statement that discusses diversity, but then also a diversity statement as well. You just want to make sure that the 2 statements aren't repeating themselves, that you're not covering the same content in both statements. I want to tackle another question here. What about students who have significant life experience and trauma that inspire them to return to community college and then undergraduate school? How personal can you get? First of all, congratulations on returning to school. That's an amazing accomplishment. That's one of the hardest things you can do is jump right back into something that you've previously tried. Regarding getting too personal, there are very few topics that I would say are off limits for personal statements. And I mean, I can't really particularly think of one. My main suggestion when I talk about personal statements and things that may be off limits would be talking about politics in a way where you're kind of preaching to the admissions committee. Politics as a topic can be a good topic because many of our students are motivated by politics to go to law school. and to enter the political world after graduation from law school. So politics itself can be a good topic. But if you're getting to, and the right word I guess I'm saying is preachy in your political conversation, your political leanings, that could be a sort of that can get to taboo, tricky territory. But in terms of getting too personal, this might be a good question for the particular schools you're applying to, but I know in the statements that I've read, students have relayed very, very personal things to me, and that actually allows me to feel more connected to them and allows me to root for them. You know, if you relay something personal, but then show what you've learned from it or how you've grown from it, or something that's very personal to you, but then how you're a better person or how you're a changed person because of it, that is something that really allows me to connect with you and allows me, like I said, to want to root for you in this process and to want to advocate for you for the admissions committee. Because part of what admissions committees are looking for when we're looking to admit students is diversity. And diversity can take many forms. And a big element of diversity is life experience. So if something's happened in your life that has shaped who you are and has motivated you to go to law school or motivated you to do something different with your life, that's a good topic for a personal statement, even if it does get personal. Because ultimately, the individuals we admit to law school are going to be those individuals who are representing our school in the legal profession and later on down the road. So going personal in a personal statement, revealing a personal topic, my advice is that that's good. That's a good thing because it allows us to connect with you in a better way. Some other pieces of advice I want to give you about personal statements, and we'll continue to monitor questions here. Some schools will ask for specific topics on their application. So as you're applying to law schools, you'll want to check the application itself because some schools will give you specificity in terms of what they want you to write. Most schools won't. Most schools will actually just have a general topic or say, please share a life experience or please share your motivation for law school. So you do want to check the individual applications as you're applying to see what they prompt you to do as far as a personal statement goes. Some people will ask if they can submit the same personal statement to each school. You'll want to be careful if you do that. You certainly can, but if you end up relating a personal statement to a particular law school, if you submit that statement to another school, you want to make sure you're not getting the name of the school wrong in the personal statement or talking about things that relate to one particular school and then using that statement for another school, if that makes sense. In terms of structure, this personal statement can take many different forms. First of all, to go back to Sonal's question, how should I open my personal statement with a story, introduction about your essay? What's the best way? I think you're hitting the nail on the head there with all comments in that question. You want to start the statement off strong. You want to have a strong, attention-grabbing opening line, something that's going to cause the reader to want to read more, to be excited about your statement, to really get their attention. So if you can open your statement with a very attention-grabbing opening line, that can only be good things. And I think you want to use the rest of that first paragraph to set the stage for what your personal statement will cover. So maybe laying out the topics that will come ahead in the statement or what the overall theme of the statement will be. So letting us know, summarizing what you're going to be telling us in the statement is a good idea for that first paragraph. And then using the body of the statement to flesh out that idea more. You know, if you're telling us a story in the personal statement, the opening paragraph will set the stage for the story, and then the rest of the paragraphs will flesh that story out in more detail. If your personal statement maybe is theme related, so you're going to talk about a history of service or a history of leadership or something like that, the body of the personal statement, the remaining paragraphs, can really give more specific examples about that and tell stories related to that. Speaking of that, I cautioned earlier that the personal statement probably shouldn't be a rehashing of the resume, and that's good advice. But if you do decide to talk about things on your resume in your personal statement, you'll want to share a little bit more about them. For example, if you reference being an officer in a campus organization, tell us some things you did as an officer. Tell us maybe a mistake you made as an officer, or tell us about a major accomplishment you had as an officer of that organization. Just really flesh it out more, just so we're getting more detail than we already have on the resume. Now, the concluding paragraph of that personal statement should tie the story or should tie the statement back together, and maybe shed more light on why this is the next path in your journey. Why is law school the next logical path for you? And if you want to talk about a specific school, this could be a prime opportunity to give more specific details about that school and why you're interested in that school. Now, I should caution, it's absolutely not required to talk about a specific school in a personal statement. We're not looking for that when we read these statements. We read it if it's there, but that's not something we're specifically looking for, knowing why you're applying to our particular school. Unless a school asks you to talk about that. Some schools may ask you to talk about that in their personal statement, and they'll tell you that on the application. But if not, feel free to shed more light on why you're considering our school if you want to, but that's certainly not a requirement if you don't want to. Let's go back to the questions here. If there's a time period in your academic career that is lacking, is there a good place to address that? I would save that for an addendum statement, and I'm going to talk about that in a little more detail later on, but I think that's a great topic for an addendum statement if you feel it's necessary to do so. And then it looks like Anja had a similar question as well about gaps in the resume, gaps in experience. So we'll discuss those addendum statements a little bit later, and I think those are great ways to address those. Same with a private comment we just received. To the person who submitted that regarding deviation in grade or LSAT score, I think addendum statements are a great way to talk about those as well. So a little bit later, I'll address that as well. Now, I want to give you the juicy stuff here. I want to give you some don'ts for your personal statement, some things not to do. Now, like I said, the personal statement is yours. It's personal. We're looking forward to you telling us what you want to tell us, because this is our way to get to know you. But if I can take a moment and tell you some don'ts, you know, these are some things, advices I would give you. And again, remember, this is just one person giving you advice. You know, I think my colleagues in other law schools would agree with me, but, and please don't take offense to anything I say as a don't, because I'll just share some stories as to why I'm saying those are don'ts. Generally, a personal statement, one of the things that we notice that a lot of students will do in a personal statement is they'll start the statement with a quote, or they'll have a quote somewhere in the statement. Now, unless that quote is sort of your defining quote, something that gets you up in the morning, something that really guides you throughout your day, it's probably not necessary to have that in your personal statement. And, you know, maybe not as an opening either. You know, we read lots of quotes from lots of influential thinkers for sure. But the thing about that is it's not your thoughts, it's theirs. So having more opportunity to share your thoughts to us and having more opportunity to really talk to us about you is the better strategy here, because, you know, your personal statement is prime real estate and you only have so much of it. So if we're really talking about other people's thoughts and ideas and quotes, we're really detracting away from you. And so kind of a general don't that I give individuals is maybe don't use a quote unless it's sort of the overarching model of quote that you live your life by. Something we see all the time, and I've seen it many times this year already, don't get the name of the school wrong in your personal statement. A lot of students will write personal statements and they'll address them to a particular school. And they'll say, I really want to go to this law school because, but they'll get the name of the school wrong in the personal statement. Now, I know this sounds basic and it sounds like a, well, no, duh, you know, comment, but if you're submitting personal statements, my advice to you would be to check the name of the school if you use it in the statement, just to make sure it's right. And also make sure you have the syntax of the school name right. You know, if you're applying to the University of something, you know, that would be a better way to address them than something university. Or if you're applying to, you know, Washburn University, we are Washburn University School of Law or Washburn Law. We're not the University of Washburn. So things like that can make a big difference. I know it seems small and it seems a little petty, but those things can make a big difference because they show attention to detail. And they show that you're not just erasing the name of one school and plugging in the name of the next one. So that's something I would caution you to do, is don't get the name of the school wrong. On the flip side, a do would be, if you use the school's name, get it right. A couple other things to think about with the personal statement. We want you to paint visuals for us. We want to be able to picture doing whatever you're describing. We want to be able to picture you doing that. But on the flip side, this isn't really a creative writing assignment. Some students will fall into the trap of using creative writing skills or employing creative writing tactics, describing the color of the leaves, in the fall or in the autumn, or talking about the dew on grass, things like that. And I don't mean to sound cynical, but, in terms of this statement, although we do want you to paint the visual, it's not so much a creative writing assignment. It's more of a personal essay to us. So maybe focusing more on, again, talking about you and less about the flowery language, is, I think, decent advice. And use your language, use your voice. We can tell a statement a mile away of someone who uses a thesaurus to look up synonyms or tries to use the biggest words they can think of in the statement. We see these every year as well. So another just practical piece of advice I would say is use your own voice, use your own words, use words that are familiar to you. Don't try to sound smarter in your statement, so to speak. Another piece of advice I would give you is to have this statement proofread by someone who knows you. And that person who's proofreading it, have them proofread it for grammar, punctuation, spelling, sentence structure, because these are ultimately the most important things about the statement, other than getting to know you, is we want to see that there's strong writing ability there. Because if we can see that there's strong writing ability, that can help overcome maybe credentials that are lower than what we're posting as our medians. If someone's concerned about LSAT or GPA or something like that, strong writing ability can help, tilt the scales in your favor. And the personal statement's a great way to showcase that. So you want to make sure that you're submitting your best work whenever you apply to a school. Because when law schools are reviewing applications, we have to assume that this is your best product that you're submitting. So in order to help you do that, bring in your army. Have people proofread it for you. Have people look over it. Have people give you advice on what you've written about. That would be another piece of advice for you. So those are kind of the general thoughts on personal statements that I would share, because I do want to dive into the other two types of statements that we're going to discuss today. But we're going to keep an eye on questions. So any questions that you have about personal statements, please ask them, and we'll continue to address them as well. But the second type of statement I want to address today is a diversity statement. Now, a diversity statement is a little less common than a personal statement. Some schools will specifically ask for them. Some schools may not ask for them. So you'll want to talk to each school that you apply to see if diversity statements are welcome. Many schools that don't ask specifically for diversity statements will still welcome them as part of your application, because again, it's another example of your writing ability. And I should, first and foremost, before we dive into a conversation about diversity statements, define what I mean by diversity statement. Diversity can take so many forms when it comes to law school. It can be ethnicity, but it can also be veteran status. It can be sexual orientation. It can be first-generation status. It can be income status. It can be single mother, single father status. It can be blended family status. It can be so many things. And there's way more examples than what I even mentioned. What you want to reflect on if you're deciding whether or not, someone asked if it can be mental health, it can definitely be mental health as well. Something you want to reflect on before you decide whether or not a diversity statement is right for you is, do you have something that you consider to be a diverse perspective that would increase the prestige of the legal profession and the prestige of law. Prestige is the wrong word, but do you have something that you think would reflect positively in the legal environment, in the legal classroom? If you do, a diversity statement is a great way to share that. Letting us know what your past experience is and how that will help guide you in the legal profession and how that will help better the law school classroom is an awesome thing. So writing a diversity statement can be a great way to highlight that. Now, these statements are typically shorter than personal statements because we've already learned quite a bit about you, hopefully, through the diversity statement or through the personal statement. But the diversity statement's a way to shed more light on who you are and what unique perspective you may bring to the classroom. We have some questions in the chat. Do most all law schools allow diversity statements to be submitted? From my experience talking to colleagues and working, because all of us admissions deans, we all work together in this profession. We all go to conferences, we all travel and recruit, so we all know each other. We're not talking about you all as particular applicants, but we all know what we each like in terms of this process. And everyone I've encountered will accept diversity statements as part of the package. But I do caution you to make sure as you're talking, this is a great way to contact each law school you're applying to ask what their thoughts are on diversity statements. And so most certainly they'll probably tell you yes, they're very wanted and desired. But you just probably want to make sure. What I can say about Washburn Law School is we welcome diversity statements. You'll see on our application and also on our website that we do invite diversity statements as part of the process, but because we really want to read them to get to know you better. There's a private question here related to a previous victimization is how I'll characterize it. Yes, it can. Because the idea behind the diversity statement is a unique perspective or perspective that you believe to be unique that you'll bring to the law school classroom that maybe is underrepresented in the legal profession, or maybe is something that guides you specifically. Now, that particular topic could be right material for the personal statement, because I can see a lot of opportunity to expand on that and to reflect on who you are because of that. But the diversity statement can also be a great way to talk about that, because that shapes your perspective that you'll bring to the classroom. We have another question here about immigrant status, an immigrant who moved to the US last month. A lawyer back in Sri Lanka, should I write a diversity statement? Yes, I think that's a great way to really shed light on that perspective, because you're coming to our American classroom with legal knowledge back from Sri Lanka, but you're also, in an overall perspective, bringing an international focus to your studies. And although other international students will be in the classroom with you, shedding light on the perspective that you bring, I think is a great idea. Someone mentioned, should we not mention diversity in our personal statement if we submit a diversity statement? And this is where it can get tricky, because you don't want to repeat yourself in both statements. But I think there's a way to talk about your diversity in both statements if you want to. I think some of the advice I'm about to give maybe will help answer that question a little better. So I'll just kind of dive into some of my thoughts on diversity statements, and maybe that'll answer that idea more specifically. As you're writing diversity statements, don't be afraid to be blunt about the diversity that you bring. But on the flip side, don't assume that a law school doesn't have that perspective. And this can get tricky, because you don't know who else is applying in the year that you're applying. So you don't have an idea of the types of applicants that we're seeing, or the types of students that are even in the law school at this current point in time. The purpose behind the diversity statement is to learn more about you, but to get a sense of how you view your diversity and how your diversity, you believe, will shape law school and the legal profession and the classroom in which you'll ultimately sit. The best advice I can give, or the best kind of thought I can give on this, is that law school deans don't know exactly what we're looking for until we see it, until we have it in front of us. We're not walking into admissions meetings with preconceived notions of what we're looking for on diversity statements or exactly what we're looking for on personal statements. We leave it up to you, the writer, to open our eyes to something, or to inspire us, or to educate us on the perspective that you bring. I've seen diversity statements cover a wide variety of topics. I've seen individuals talk about how they've seen their race to be underrepresented in the legal profession through data or empirical research or through personal experience, and how they believe they would increase the racial ethnic diversity of the legal profession. That's a great option. I've seen students talk about how they've grown up in low-income environments and how that's shaped their perspective and how they'll help clients in the future who maybe can't afford to pay them. I've seen that. I've seen students talk about sexual orientation, veteran status, religious affiliation. I've seen individuals talk about overcoming illness, mental health issues, single family issues, single parent issues. So again, it's a topic that I can't give concrete things on because we don't know what we're looking for. But what a law school won't do is we're not going to hold it against a student if they write a diversity statement at all. I mean, because we're not in the position to think, oh, that's not diversity. That's not what we're looking for here. We want to know what you're thinking, the diversity that you feel you're bringing to the classroom. And, we want to be educated on that, and we want to learn more about you through that. But something that you do want to highlight in the diversity statement is why that diversity, whatever that diversity is, whatever that perspective is, why it's important for law school and the legal community. Because that shows self-reflection. That shows that you've thought about this, that you're inspired to make a difference, that you're inspired not to be the voice of that particular type of diversity. That's not what I'm asking. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is you've done that reflection, you've done that thought process, you've done that critical thinking to determine that, yes, my perspective, my experience doesn't hinder me, but it helps me. And here's why. And here's why you as the law school want me in your classroom, because of this perspective that I bring. Let's go to the questions and see a couple here. I've heard in the personal statement that we should include what we will do with the degree, how we will bring honor to the school. And if so, how is the best way to go about doing this? So shifting back for a second to the personal statement to answer this question here. Yeah, we always want to know, what your motivations are. That being said, we don't expect you to come in with specific legal, with a specific plan in mind for what you want to do with your law degree. It's certainly not required. And most students, they'll change when they get to law school. They'll come into law school having a specific idea of what they want to do, but then that'll change, that'll shift while they're in law school. So although we don't expect or require that you'll come in and talk to us about what specifically you want to do with your degree after you graduate, if you have ideas in mind of what you want to do, sure, share those, because that can, again, give the committee more guidance on your thought process and your motivation for both doing law school and how you'll represent us as an alum when you've graduated. How you'll bring honor to the school, there may be specific schools that ask you to address that, but that's not a topic we see often in personal statements. If we admit you as a student to our school, we are doing so because we believe that you will be a strong law student and you'll be a great representative of our school when you graduate. So in terms of bringing honor, I don't know how to exactly define that, but I would say the idea is that we're placing trust in you if we've admitted you to our school. So we do believe that you will bring honor to our school if we have, admitted you. But if you want to use your personal statement to maybe make your pitch as to why, you feel that you deserve a spot, feel free to do that, but ultimately also include information that allows us to get to know you better. Someone asked if we'll see as part of your application that you filled out diversity pieces there. We will. We certainly will. If you've indicated that you come from an underrepresented population in the legal community, we will see that as part of the application. So that doesn't require a diversity statement, and a diversity statement is never required of an applicant. But it's just a statement that you can submit if you choose to, if you feel it's necessary to communicate that. And what all law schools will do is they will respect if you choose to submit a diversity statement, and we'll read it, and we'll use it as a writing sample, and we'll use it to learn more about you. And that's what we'll use it for. What are the don'ts for diversity statements, someone asked. It's hard because I think some of the don'ts that I mentioned for personal statements also relate to diversity statements as well. I would say the main don't on diversity statements, don't use it as a platform to lecture us on, and lecture is a harsh word. So don't use it as a platform to lecture us on past injustice or cultural differences. Law schools are aware of the world in which we live, and the world now, and the world as it was previously. So taking up that valuable real estate to give a history lesson to your admissions committee, is not the best use of that diversity statement. The diversity statement being more about you is a better use of that real estate. So I would say one of the major don'ts is, don't lecture on cultural differences or systemic oppression or policies that you feel may be negatively impacting your particular diversity. Those would be your main don'ts there. But also don't make assumptions about the school that you're applying to. Diversity is a focus for all law schools in the US. And again, I mentioned diversity takes many, many forms. So don't make if you're applying to a school in an area that you believe to be less diverse, don't make assumptions, because it may not be. There may be other things that come into play there. So the overall don'ts of a diversity statement I think are less important than the do. And the do is, if reflection tells you that you bring a unique perspective to the legal education, and you want to share that, and you're motivated to share that, please do. We're happy. We're glad. We're welcoming that, and we're excited to hear about it. From there, let me go to the last piece of the third piece that I want to talk about today, and then we will kind of tie everything together and answer some additional questions. That piece is addendum statements. Now, addendum statements are great ways to explain unanswered questions with the application. There's a few different types of diversity statements out there, a couple that have already been asked about in the questions, but let me briefly talk about each of those. Students will typically use addendum statements for describing past civil or criminal sanctions, past interactions with law enforcement or the justice system or the legal system. Every law school will ask you on the application about character and fitness issues. Any past dealings you've had in the criminal or civil world with law enforcement, the justice system. And we ask those not to use them as ways to deny you or to form negative impressions on you. We ask that so that we can make sure that you would be eligible someday to take the bar exam. The best way to go about it is to disclose anything. If a law school asks you on the application to disclose, that's what you should do. You should disclose any past civil or criminal issues that you've had, any past interactions with law enforcement. But different schools will ask different things in their character and fitness questions. Some will ask about speeding and parking tickets. Most won't, but some might. So you want to read those specific questions to find out what law schools are asking for. And if you do answer yes to any character and fitness question, you'll want to attach an addendum statement describing and explaining why you answered yes to that question. And that statement should be a pretty short, very brief statement that gets right down to the heart of the issue, telling us what the what the infraction was. I use infraction as a broad term because different schools will ask for different things. What the issue was, how it resolved, what you learned from it, and why that's not you as a person, why that's not reflective of who you are as a person. Again, I want to stress that law schools don't ask this as looking for another excuse, to deny you. We want to know any past interactions you've had with law enforcement and the legal and the justice system, because ultimately the bar examiners, when you apply to take a bar exam in the US, they're going to do a background check. And what they're going to do is they're going to compare what they find in their background check with what you've included in your application. And if there's differences, if there's discrepancies, if there's things that aren't included in the application that are included in your background check, that's going to raise additional questions and could pose problems when you're applying for a bar exam or when you're being approved to sit for a bar examination. So schools asking character and fitness questions is a way for you to be able to be upfront and disclose those issues. One of the questions asked is, so far I haven't seen any specifics on how long an addendum should be. Addendum should be your shortest statement of the statements that you submit, if you choose to submit more than just the personal statement. The addendum statement should be very brief, get right to the point, describe the incident, if we're talking about character and fitness statements, the incident, what it was, how it resolved, and why it's not reflective of your character. So that is one type of addendum statement. Let me transition to a couple others because we've talked about, we have questions in the chat about some of these. Some person did ask about speeding parking tickets. That would be specific to the school. So read each school specific question on their application about their character and fitness, because some will ask for that information. Most won't, but some might. Washburn Law does not ask about parking tickets. We don't ask about speeding tickets, but we ask about other infractions. So you want to check that specific application of the school you're applying to. Another type of statement that students often submit is statements about low LSAT score or lower GPA. And this can be a helpful statement for the admissions committee to shed some light on why an LSAT score may be lower than the school's median. The important thing to stress, though, is that this shouldn't be an excuse. And I don't mean that to sound so harsh, but it shouldn't be an excuse statement. If there's specific reasons why an LSAT score is maybe lower than what you'd like it to be, maybe something happened on test day, maybe you were sick before, maybe family trauma got in the way, maybe there was something that was out of your control that affected your performance on the exam. Those are definitely things that we as an admissions committee want to know about. A popular topic for LSAT-based addendum statements is that my LSAT score is low, but my performance in undergrad, is high. Just like my ACT score or my SAT score was low, but my performance in undergrad was high. Though the effectiveness of those statements depend on the school, because on one hand, we already see that you have done well in undergrad, so we can already make that comparison. We can already see that, well, even though there's a low LSAT score, there's high GPA, there's a strong academic performance. We can already draw that parallel there. On the flip side, ultimately the LSAT can be an important part of this process because it can help reflect, it's the highest predictor of success in your first year and ultimately success on the bar examination. Now, all law schools are cognizant of the fact that the LSAT is not there's some inherent bias. There could be some inherent bias built into that exam in the sense that every year different populations of individuals score differently on this exam. So no school is using the LSAT as the one factor in this process, but we are looking at it as a predictive factor as well. And so if you do choose to attach an addendum statement about the LSAT, you want to be upfront as to why you believe that score is a little lower than what the school may be looking for if you're applying. This is actually one of those topics that is best handled through the particular schools you're applying to, because they're excited to help you through this, and they're excited to provide you advice on LSAT-based addendum statements. But you do want to share that information with the school as you're considering writing that, because Different schools may handle that statement differently. A low GPA can also be a topic for an addendum statement. However, probably the least effective GPA-based addendum statements are ones that highlight one particular or two particular bad grades on a transcript. I would say for most law schools, that's probably not the most necessary statement to submit because schools can see your transcripts as they're evaluating you. And if they see a history of high grades, but then maybe one or two not so great grades, it's not going to cause much concern for the admissions committee. If there's a semester that ended up lower than other semesters, that could be a good topic for an addendum statement to let us know what was going on that semester. Maybe the transition to college was a little rougher than you would have liked. Or maybe there were specific family issues happening during that time that impacted your concentration and impacted your performance. Please write an addendum on that. Let us know about that. The overall model, I guess I should have said at the beginning of this, is that law schools, we're not looking for reasons to deny you. We're looking for reasons to admit you. So any information that we can have that shed more light on the application itself is valuable. So if you do have a GPA-based addendum statement story you'd like to share, please do. Let's go back to the chat here. How should you explain gaps in your professional career if you've been pursuing an artistic endeavor for a few years and now want to study law? And where should this be mentioned at all? We will see the resume as part of the application, and you can actually include those artistic endeavors on your resume because they have been part of your trajectory since undergrad. So a resume is actually a good place to include those artistic endeavors, even if you're not being paid for them, even if you're not, being employed at an employer through those artistic endeavors. It's part of your experience. So including that on the resume, I think, is a good idea. So I think instead of actually having an addendum statement to address the gap, I would just include it on the resume as part of your experience, because we're not addressing a resume specifically today, but as part of your application, most schools don't have specific rules about the resume. We're not specifically wanting you to have a one-page resume and that's it. So you do have a little freedom on the resume to talk about things that maybe you wouldn't if you were submitting a one-page resume for a job. So I think if you have artistic endeavors, or if you have travel experiences, or if you have study abroad experiences, or things that maybe cause you to have a gap in your work experience, include that as experience on your resume, would be my advice. But if you're unsure, you can certainly talk to any pre-law advisors you meet or other law schools as well. If I have a class withdrawal on my undergrad transcript, is that something worthy of an addendum? In most cases, no. If you have a semester of withdrawals, that could be a good addendum statement, just to shed light on why you withdrew from a semester of classes. But a particular withdrawal here and there doesn't really concern most admissions committees in the grand scheme of things. So just to be blunt, that's not going to be something that I would write an addendum statement on. But if there is a history of withdrawals or a semester full of withdrawals, that could be something to shed light on. Do candidates appearing for GRE instead of LSAT have any disadvantage? How is the comparison done? That conversation goes a little beyond the scope of today's specific, but I would love to chat with you further if you want to chat with me more about that. Certain law schools in the US are now accepting the GRE as an additional opportunity for admission in addition to the LSAT, or in place of the LSAT. I have not been in those conversations with those schools. I have not been in those admissions committee rooms. They're not allowed for it to have any, advantage or disadvantage. They have to treat all applicants equally. So I don't know of any disadvantage that would be there by using the GRE instead of the LSAT. But if you are applying to a school that does accept the GRE, that's a great conversation to have with those particular schools as to how they review the GRE and what they use that score for. Are publications something that should be included on your resume? Yes, I think so, because it allows us to learn more about you and is part of your life story and a part of your accomplishments. So I think publications are definitely a great thing to have on a resume. And again, for most schools, they wouldn't fault you for using a 2-page resume instead of a 1-page. If you're unsure, you can talk to each particular school you're applying to. Washburn Law does not fault you for having more than a one-page resume, because we want to use that resume to learn more about you. And so I think publications that you've had allow us to learn more about your accomplishments. So I think they're perfect for the resume. I'm reading a question. As you're addressing addendums, we have a specific question about a lower GPA due to an issue of which the applicant was unaware. But they've since managed that very well. Admissions committees often don't read these addendum statements as excuses. We see them as a way for you to shed light on something that you're concerned about in your application. Because when we put an application before an admissions committee or an admissions dean, we never want any unresolved questions as part of the application. We never want the committee to ask why, or why is this the way it is. We encourage, at least at Washburn Law, we encourage all applicants to advocate for themselves. And I think using an addendum statement to talk about a lower GPA based on an undiagnosed issue is a great way to advocate for yourself, and a great way to show empowerment and show that you've overcome that, and show that you're now managing it very well, and to show that, you know, since the time that you've been in college, you've learned from it and you've grown from it, you know, in the sense of, you know, growing your GPA or, you know, managing it very well outside of college. I don't think it's an excuse at all. I think it can be an empowering statement that you can write to the committee to show them, you know, what you've faced and how you've overcome that. So I don't see it as an excuse at all. We have a question about letters of recommendation. I'll quickly address that as well. For the letters of recommendation, recommenders, he's asking whether recommenders should write separate letters personalized for each law school. In most cases, that's not necessary, and schools aren't looking specifically for that. If a recommender wants to do that and wants to write a letter to a specific school, they certainly can, because as you apply to law schools, you identify which letters go to which schools. So if a recommender has attached a specific letter to your file, you could certainly attach that to the law school. But most law schools aren't looking specifically for those and aren't expecting letters addressed specifically to them. But you certainly could do that if you wanted to. Someone asked what constitutes the need for an addendum for a low LSAT or lower GPA. Just because maybe you're coming in with an LSAT or a GPA that's lower than the school's median doesn't necessarily mean you need to write an addendum on it. Again, the best addendums that relate to this category are ones that clear up unanswered questions. Maybe something that happened that caused the lower LSAT score, or maybe something that happened that caused the lower GPA. Just having a lower LSAT score itself or having a lower GPA itself isn't probably the best topic for an addendum statement, but it might be a good way for you to seriously evaluate what law schools you're applying to. Because ultimately, as a pre-law advisor typically gives advice to students that they should apply to a variety of law schools. Some that their numbers are higher than the school's medians, so that they stand a decent shot of being admitted. Some where they're right in the mix, and then some where maybe they're a little bit lower, but they would really love to go to those schools if admitted. I think any applicant that employs that strategy will maybe have a couple schools on their radar that maybe they're lower than the school's medians. But the fact that you have a score that's lower than a school's median itself probably isn't worthy of an addendum statement. I guess my advice, and again, I'm only one person, only giving one piece of advice here, would be if there's something specific that caused that score to be lower, or something specific that caused that GPA to be lower than what the school may be looking for, that could be good grounds for an addendum statement. Couple other questions here. To the applicant who talked about dual enrollment, no, I don't think that necessarily requires an addendum statement. But if it gives you more confidence to submit one, you certainly can. But in situations that we've seen from our admissions committee in the past with this, that type of thing hasn't really risen to the level where we've needed an addendum statement to shed more light on that. But if you certainly want to do so, just for your peace of mind, you certainly could. The important thing to remember through this process is that this is your application. To each of you who are applying, this is your application. This is your chance to talk to the admissions committee. So any advice that I give should just be advice. If you do feel that you want to submit something to give you more peace of mind as you're applying, do that. There are no hard and fast rules about this process other than what the school specifically dictates to you in the application. So if you do want to submit an addendum statement to talk about something I haven't addressed or something you feel is worthy of an addendum statement, that's certainly something you can do. Have a question here. I'm reading as well. To get to the gist, there's no right or wrong. To Tracy's question, there's no right or wrong here. The personal statement.
They can't see her question because it's private.
Oh, sorry. This is a private question. So to Tracy, in general, the question relates to years of experience and how that should be reflected in the application. Personal statement can be a great way to talk about that, but so can, we'll see on the resume, the level of experience that you've had in your various fields. Diversity statement could be a way to put this, but I think if this varied experience and this level of experience and this this wisdom that comes with your years of experience has shaped you and why you're going to law school, that could be a great personal statement for sure. In terms of diversity, it could be a good diversity statement if you have other topics you want to address in your personal statement. But I think this sounds like it could be crafted into a really good, really strong personal statement, because ultimately it lets us get to know you and who you are and really allows us to feel more passionate about who you are and sort of why you're joining us now, why you're coming to law school now. And to specifically address what you asked, should I address why now? Sure. I think we always want to know why someone's thinking law school or why they're passionate about the legal profession. So that's certainly something you can address as well. And I can certainly, if you want to reach out to me privately, I can certainly give you more advice on your specific question as well. So from there, I've taken up an hour of your time here, and I very much appreciate you joining us today for this webinar. We hope to do more in the future. Washburn Law School, I'll do a 1-second plug for us. If you haven't heard of us, we are a school in Topeka, Kansas, the state capital of Kansas. We have no application fee, and we have an awesome program called Third Year Anywhere that actually allows you to spend your last year of law school in the place where you want to be after graduation. We would invite applications from anyone attending the panel today. We hope you do apply. And on that note, I want to thank you so much for attending and look for a follow-up email from us. And I'm so excited that you all were here, and I'm hopefully glad to answer all of your questions. And please feel free to reach out to us if you have any additional questions. Thank you all and have a great night.